just before the episode starts, let me do a quick plug. If you're in Melbourne next week for the National Education Summit and you're going to be there on Thursday, the 3rd of September, we are recording a live episode of the podcast at 11:30 in the main area for the conference. So come along and find us. What we're really keen to do is to give you the opportunity to ask questions, and we'll have a crack at answering them. And hopefully that will make us a great episode for a couple of weeks' time. So, Melbourne, next Thursday, the 3rd of September, mid-morning, 11:30. See you at the National Education Summit.
Welcome to the AI in Education podcast. Where are you today, Ray?
Dan, I'm working from home today. I've been reflecting on some work I'm doing around change management and how many lessons there are from 100 years ago that still apply. It's fascinating. What about you? What have you been up to, Dan?
Well, what have I been up to altogether? I've been doing a lot this week. I actually spoke to the Alcohol and Drug kind of foundation talking about AI. So they've created a bot to support people with drug and alcohol addictions and things. Really interesting because obviously they've got a couple of insights just for your interest, your the listeners' interest. They've got some insights into the fact that what had happened was since ChatGPT came out, their websites went down from hundreds of thousands of hits per month to drastically off a cliff.
Right.
Because people are going to AI for some support around drug and alcohol abuse. But then they also realized that the hits on their website were going up from AI scraping tools.
Right.
So it's really interesting. So it's kind of like diverting from the official site to the AI. So they were trying to meet where like a happy medium in between. So they've created a bot called Dib on their website to support people with alcohol and drug addiction, which is really interesting. The other interesting thing I've been thinking about recently as well, I've been going to school. There's just happening quite a lot, and I don't know what you were seeing in this area, but lots of people are starting to play with code and things like that, creating, in quotes, enterprise applications, and then realizing that, it's like it comes up with a great student, like information system or whatever it might be, application, but then it isn't really fit for business use. So people got to log into it. You might be putting PII into it. So there's a lot of people starting to teachers playing on the fringe, coming up with some great use cases, and then having to move that into enterprise. So I've been seeing a bit of that as well. Have you seen any of that in commercial?
Definitely. So first of all, let me talk about my personal use of Claude Code. So I use Claude Code to generate websites and assets and stuff. But where I draw the line is it mustn't be something that somebody has to put personal information into, like a login or something like that. If I have to build something with the login, I'll use like Cloudflare on the front to do the login, because I don't want to be responsible for storing lots of personal information.
Exactly
It
right.
comes with a bunch of obligations. So that we are having exactly the same conversation in other situations around, okay, so how do we go from vibe coding in and all kinds of tools into something that is supportable across the organization? So you're absolutely right. It's an issue for people. And what I feel is it's really easy to build a vibe-coded prototype in a weekend, and then it's 6 months to turn it into an enterprise tool.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The other thing I did actually was watching the Olympics on the weekend, the humanoid Olympics in Beijing. I don't know if you saw any of that. The robot that's just like beaten Usain Bolt's 100 meters record or whatever. And it's some fun stuff when you start to watch it just from an AI point of view. One of the scary points in that, no, actually it's not scary, but an interesting point is that you can see the heavily amount that China is investing in robotics and artificial intelligence at a countrywide level, and which we've seen a lot in the research and news episodes as well. I think it was like 75% of the entries for this thing were all like Chinese and things like that. While everybody's attention is focusing on Elon Musk's kind of robots or Atlas or whatever it might be, you've got this other area where there's an industrial scale robotic kind of innovation that's happening at the country.
And the point isn't to build a robot that can run the fastest 100 meter, but it's to advance the technology to the point that it becomes capable of doing lots of different things. And there are some benchmarks. Can it run 400 meters? I know when they ran the robot marathon in Beijing earlier on in the year, and one of the robots fell over just before the finish line and broke into 1,000 pieces. And the observation was, robots can't run marathons. It's like, this robot just ran 41 kilometers. That was interesting.
Insane.
So, yeah, I always look at those things, and they're amazing and they're scary at the same time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And everybody laughs over the funny side of it when one ran really fast into a barrier and then fell over and there's sparks everywhere. Everybody loves that kind of stuff. But there's a serious element to it, and robotic championships are always things that people excel at.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because if you think about students that take part in robot wars and have been doing for years, all of those competitions, we're now getting to a point where the challenge might be, can you pick up an egg and transport it across the room? Which is then starting to get to, okay, from being a piece of technology, I can see this having applications in care services, in warehousing, and all those kind of things. And it's amazing advancement. And you're right, the sheer volume of different robots that they have in China and that we're seeing in these robot games is quite scary.
It is. It's astonishing, really, and it shows that when people focus on things and invest in the right areas or wrong areas or whatever you want to call it, things move quickly. So when we go to the news today, then one of the things that was happening, we mentioned it slightly last week, because Jason Clare in Australia, he's the federal education minister. He came out and he talked about the fact that they're looking at take-home tests in schools in New South Wales and beyond, and Australia generally, where we need to think about the fact that the efficacy of those tests are kind of broken down because of AI. So therefore, what do we do about that? We try to reduce the amount of take-home tests. So they brought all the ministers together, and there was an op-ed in the ABC News this week where they brought together quite a lot of the statements and facts, and there's gaps in this article, by the way, but a lot of information to do with the different states in Australia. So they talked about New South Wales, they talked about South Australia's EdChat. So do you have a look at this article at all?
Yeah, I did. I didn't see it until you told me about it, and I had a read of it, and I thought it was interesting because I don't know if you feel this sometimes. If I don't know much about a topic, I find an article really interesting and informative. If I know a lot about the topic, I look at the article, they missed some bits.
Oh, yeah.
And so in this one, the focus was generated, I think, because in New South Wales, they have said that they're trying to clamp down on take-home assessments for school students, and that all the assessments have got to be done under supervision because of the risk of AI. And so they then said to the other states, what are you doing? And I think there are two things going on. There's what is happening in assessment and how do we make robust and secure assessments? And then what is happening in learning? And so we know, because of the stories we've talked to people about over the last 3 years, so many people deploying things like AI bots and chatbots for students and homework assistants and things like that at the same time as giving tools to the teachers to help them with workload and some of their administration. So different states are moving at different paces. Some states are moving, I'd say, pretty slowly. They're taking a watching brief and not making decisions. Others are slamming on the brakes and others are accelerating, which is fascinating because probably we don't know what the right answer is, and we'll learn from having these different experiments in the same country.
Yeah, well, one of the good parts in this as well was Professor Leslie Lowell. She's talked a lot about equity in AI over the years as well. She's a very esteemed expert, and she talked in there. Again, it's not rocket science here, but yes, AI is there to help students who are struggling, but also we've got to watch that kind of element of retention and education in terms of some of the kind of pedagogy behind it all. But really interesting just to get a glimpse of it. But you're right, it does create gaps, and when you're looking at it, you're thinking, why didn't they mention? They talk about South Australia's EdChat that we've spoken to here, and then they haven't talked about the New South Wales one or Corella in Queensland. So
and I think part of it is AI is a headline that people will click on. So there was a story in the Sydney Morning Herald that covers New South Wales about how universities in New South Wales are using AI in lectures and as study buddies. And I think the inevitable is you put the right thing in the headlines, people click. Journalists have to have people click on stories because not enough people pay for the news, and so you pay for it with your eyeballs on the adverts. And so they have to have click-worthy headlines.
Yeah, and it is frustrating. You're right, because hopefully some of our listeners who've listened to some of the discourse on the podcast. When you're reading some of this, it gets quite frustrating because obviously it's written for the general population and everybody seems to care about AI in education because everybody's been to school and got kids or family members in there, so they kind of care about edu.
It's also becoming popular. In the last couple of weeks, I've seen there's a story in The Economist based on one of the research papers we talked about a month ago that showed that students have short-term benefits from using AI if they don't use it in the right way, but not long-term benefits. They can pass a test tomorrow, but in a week's time, they can't remember what they learned. That was in The Economist. The Financial Times, they ran an article called AI Labs Begin to Muscle In on the $6 trillion education market. And what they were basically saying is, we think AI companies are targeting education and giving lots of AI away to try and get education organizations hooked onto using AI. And so, putting AI and education into a headline is getting people to click on things.
The other one, though, isn't it, is when you're talking about one of the things people are pushing back on in the US, specifically data centers at the minute.
Oh, not just in the US.
Well, physical point of view.
Yeah. So there's a lot of disquiet over data centers. Okay, so Dan, let me explain the way I think about this. I sadly have a rational mind. And so I had a conversation with a friend a couple of weeks ago who was like, data centers are terrible. And so I tried to explore with him in a rational way what his worries were. And his worries were, it's going to use all this energy. And I was like, well, okay, in New South Wales, we have data center standards that say that the energy has to come from renewable sources. They also set energy efficiency standards for the data centers. They say 40% of the energy has to come from wind. They have to have storage capacity for 25% of the capacity of their data centers' energy usage. And so there are standards in place that set a very high bar for what energy can be used and what energy efficiency they have. And he said, well, but water. And
I was going to say, the water's the next one.
We went on to water, and he's a mad keen golfer, and we've talked about this before, Dan. I said, well, let's take all the water that the data centers in New South Wales use, and then double it, and then double it again, and then double it again, and it's still not using as much water as the golf courses. And he was like, well, that can't be right. Like, well, done the work. So we ended up into this thing of, yes, it does use water, but modern data centers are very efficient. I mean, the New South Wales government is introducing water use standards for data centers. The most efficient data centers are 10 times more efficient than the standard that they're setting. And so water usage is an issue, but it's low in comparison to other things.
Yeah, and then when you look into these metrics, like you might know more about these, but when I've read some of the sustainability reports, you've got PUEs and WUEs, PUEs and WUEs, right? Is that the way we measure?
Okay.
Are we supposed to measure power and water?
Yeah, so PUE is power usage efficiency. Yeah. And WUE is water usage efficiency. So I'll tell you about PUEs first, Dan. So that is saying how much of the energy that comes into the data center is used for computing. Because there's a whole load of energy used for things like cooling and other things that are not used for computing. Yeah. So what you're looking for is a PUE of 1, which means every single watt that comes into the building is used for computing things, not for cooling and other things. So generally around the world, we've got down to a PUE of about 1.25. The base data centers are like 1.1, and it can be really small things. I remember we talked about this on a podcast about 5 or 6 years ago, that one of the ways to reduce your power consumption was to paint the roof white, because then you had less heat coming into the data center, so you needed less cooling. So there are a whole load of things. And of course, it's in the tech company's best interest to make that as efficient as possible because they don't want to waste power. But the new measure is WUE, which is how much water do you have to use to cool your data center. And in New South Wales, the new standards say the WUE has to be less than 1. Some data centers In fact, let's talk about the Kemps Creek data center. The Kemps Creek data center, which is a huge data center proposed in New South Wales, that has a WE of 0.1. So 10 times more efficient than the government standards. So when you start to get to that point, it's like, well, it's not, given the outputs that are possible, it's not using that much water. But the great news is there are standards for it. The governments are setting standards.
But there's also misinformation, isn't there? Because if you look, the other one people talk about is noise or data centers.
Yeah.
And obviously part of the critical infrastructure, as we were talking about just before we came on air, is the fact that you need to test redundancy in your electricity system. So you have to have diesel generators to kind of, if it's critical infrastructure, that you need to be able to power those things up. So often people, like to things like the main data centers in Sydney and things, you walk past, drive past, and you wouldn't even know they're there. Whereas like you might hear the diesel generators running once in a while.
Yeah, so it's a government requirement if you're running critical infrastructure in Australia, and data centers, most data centers are classified as critical infrastructure because they're running banking, they're running telecom services. So in the same way that your telco has to have a backup plan, so do the data centers. And so that includes being told that they must check their backup plan. They have to cut the power and run their generators. I think it's like an hour a month. And so at that point, you've got a bunch of generators going, generating noise. So the answer then is to build data centers away from homes.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was reading a story in Melbourne. They're proposing to build a data center right under the flight path of the airport. Houses are not allowed to be built there.
Yeah.
And so it'll have no noise impact at all, but people still objecting. So I guess what I'm feeling is, go back to me and my rational thinking. I don't think that the problem is rational objections, because there are answers to the rational objections. And my friend who's the big golfer, once we'd discussed energy, once we'd discussed water usage, and I defended him by saying that if we close one golf course, we can open 5 data centers. And there are 369 golf courses in New South Wales. Once we'd done that, he then moved on to tax, he moved on to noise, he moved on to heat. And we talked about each of those. And then the end point was, yeah, but I still don't like it. And that's where I think it is the tech industry are looking at this as a rational, there's a set of rational arguments. All we need to do is disprove the rational arguments. But I don't think it's about that. It may not be driven by a rational thing. It's driven by a feeling thing. And I get that because, good God, the AI industry has spent the last year forecasting the end of all of our jobs. So you want to be liked, don't tell people you're going to take their jobs away.
Yeah, we talked last week about what our whys are, what we think our kind of positions are on certain things. Are we baddies or goodies in this debate then, do you think?
Well, Dan, you and I have spent our whole career promoting education technology, and the last 7 years talking about AI every week or every few weeks, generally in a positive way. So are we the baddies? I don't think we are. But I think it is really important for us to be consistently talking about the upsides and the downsides. And I think we do. If you look at all of the discussions we've had about research on the use of AI in education, we've been really clear to say, hey, used in this way, it takes learning backwards. Used in this way, it takes learning forward. I think we need to still keep doing that. And the answer isn't for everything to be done on screen. I mean, we haven't gone into detail talking about the Alpha School, but I feel really uncomfortable about a model that says we don't need teachers anymore, stick your headphones on, spend 2 hours in a classroom being taught by AI. That makes me uncomfortable, because teaching isn't, or learning isn't just about acquiring as much knowledge as possible. It's about the application. It's about the essential human skills we need for the next decade.
Yeah, and we've also learned, everybody's looking back at history and learning from the mistakes. And this was Australia's led the world year in the social media delay, which is quite interesting. So we sort of not trusting some of the big tech company. It was really interesting, actually. When I was at that ADF presentation in the evening last week, one of the first questions was about big tech. and the thing about relying on big tech and trusting big tech it was about trust and transparency and things like that. And it's interesting from a Microsoft point of view, because I was like, the Microsoft one is really interesting because we working with healthcare and government and education and health and things like that, but very seldomly come up in the big tech trust conversations, or not just that, but just also the AI discourse. If people talk about AI, they talk about Anthropic and OpenAI. So it's actually more nuanced than just big tech. It's actually people pushing against particular companies at the minute who are focusing on AI and whether we should trust, the Metas of the world and the OpenAIs of the world and the Microsofts of the world and the Googles of the world. But it is interesting, and you can see the way that companies are pushing into there, because we've got ChatGPT just released for teens, which is going to be an interesting thing. Again, I don't know if you saw that in the news recently.
Yeah, I did. And interesting calling it ChatGPT for teens. Teens, not teams. Teens, Teens. Let's go and ask AI how many E's in teens.
How many E's?
Okay, so yeah, so they announced this, like if you're 13 plus, there is a parental mode where where you can have a teen access. Parents or the teen can switch on learning mode, where it doesn't just give you the answer and it Socratically guides you through the process. It'll do knowledge checks in it. And you can have study hours. In fact, you can have two things: study hours and quiet hours. And these can be set by the parent as well. So I could say between 5 and 8 in the evening, it's study hours. You cannot use it to write your assignment because it'll refuse that a task, but it'll be a Socratic tutor. And then between 8 and 9 o'clock, go at it. But then at 9 o'clock, it's then into quiet hours, and it won't work with you until 7 a.m. the next morning.
This is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, because it's pushing the consumer use of AI and the parental controls into the family.
Yes.
It's still not enterprise AI. And I know I keep going about that. I'll try to take my bias off about that, but it still worries me that schools are not able to manage or distribute or analyze conversations that are happening with the consumer tools, and they can't manage agentic AI, or they can't manage governance and PII through these. So it's very much in the consumer lens. It's very much like Xbox or your Apple phones, and you're managing parental controls there. But it's a good step forward, right?
Yeah, so the parental controls include alerts to parents if there's a sensitive conversation. They can't read, they can't see the conversation, but it can create alerts for the parent. But I think this is this bit where it crosses over. Should a school be able to see all use of technology from a student? I don't believe they should. I believe that some of that has been intrusive in some of the monitoring that's happened in the past. I think probably what is better is the model that you had with your kids, which is their Xbox was set up in kids mode and you had parental controls over how they could use it or not. Because if you try and say the only tool that our students can use in their personal life as well as their school life is this tool we provided, we know what's going to happen. The kids are just going to go somewhere else.
Yeah. Is this only the US or is this global?
This is global. I mean, it's interesting because if we talk about enterprise AI for a minute in education, the other thing that happened was that in the last couple of weeks is Google switched on AI, Gemini AI, for all ages of students by default in Google for Education.
I know.
Now, I'm really uncomfortable with that. I don't think that should have been on by default, because as a school, the fact that I've got people using Google for Education and then suddenly it's putting an AI tool in front of those students, that should be me opting to do that, not switched on by default. So I think it is really interesting, the decisions that are being taken around this. Different people have different approaches. I think part of it is we do not know what the right answer is, because if you were to examine our conversations about this over the last 5 years, we've been moving around as we go. We're building this plane as we fly it. So let's keep having the conversation and let's keep bringing to the listeners the latest information, what people are doing. We're not going to change the tech world. We're not going to change what AI is doing. Our job is to interpret what's going on and help people make sense of it, I think.
Yes, absolutely. The next piece of news that came up here is about Adelaide University. So I'm studying at Adelaide University at the minute. And this is interesting because this has got a lens of provisions of AI in the workplace rather than necessarily on teaching and learning, I believe, right?
Yeah, so we're seeing headlines about the way that AI is changing the workforce and entry-level jobs disappearing because of AI, people's roles disappearing because of AI, and we don't know how true or not that is. But this is important because universities are being seen by the government as kind of model employers. They should model good practice. And so Adelaide, which is probably one of the world's newest universities because they've merged two big universities in South Australia, have got a new enterprise agreement. So that's the agreement between the unions and the employees about the way that the organization is going to work. So it's a kind of tripartite: employees, unions, and employer. And what they've done
It's good to bring the union along with that as well.
and what they've done in there is including, alongside the things about working hours and, I don't know, contact hours and how you recruit for a role, they have now got things in there specifically around AI. So they have a clause in there which is the university AI systems must be used ethically, transparently, and with appropriate human oversight. Staff must be informed whenever AI is used in decisions that affect employment. Staff must be trained and supported in the use of AI. And the one is the interesting one. There must be consultation with staff before new mandatory AI systems are introduced into the workforce. So if you want everyone to use an AI system for logging your, I don't know, let's say for assessment review, consulting with staff, checking how it's going to affect the way that people work. So not for voluntary things, but as things become mandatory.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, like you're saying, it's a good opportunity for Adelaide Uni because obviously they're a large university. They've just merged together into one. So they've got an opportunity to change policy with the new workplace anyway. So then the interesting thing now, though, is that we're starting to see some AI stuff in the vocational sector as well. So
yes,
we start to see the regulator in vocational education start to think about AI. ASQA.
ASQA. Yeah. So in Australia, TEXA are the regulator for higher education, and they've been doing a lot around AI and academic integrity. And in the school space, we've had the AI framework for schools for 2.5 years now, and additional state-based ones. But we've not had much from ASQA. They have now issued some guidance around responsible AI. And it matches the work that I've been doing with organizations around the AI governance toolkit. I created with the Future Skills organization that work in the vet space a free AI governance toolkit that people can use to help them in their process. But this matches out for me. But I'll tell you what was interesting. One of the upfront things was a principle that said, how will you advise students and gain their prior written consent when their personal or sensitive information may be used in or processed by an AI-enabled system or software solution? So it's not are you thinking about doing this? It is, how will you do this? Because they're pretty much saying it's a requirement that if you're going to use personal data, and that could include a student's name, in an AI system, you've got to have prior written consent from the student. What's your reaction to that, Dan?
Okay. Yeah. Well, if you need the consent from the student, like in anything, so like multiple times.
Well,
this is what I'm getting confused at here. Like it's if you get my consent to use AI, that's blanket across everything.
Yeah, I think that's how people will kind of assume it.
Because it's multiple use cases, isn't it? That's what I'm trying to get my head around with this. It's like, well, yeah, I might want to use AI for one particular thing, but not, or you be using it for one thing, but then what about if you're using it for other things, like the assessment of my exam or assessment of written work or video AI or the devil's in the detail here, I think.
Yeah, I suspect what we'll end up with is a privacy statement update that says we'll be using your data in AI systems for teaching and learning purposes. That's probably where it is. But then it's you've got to get prior written consent. So is a tick box enough, or has somebody actually got to sign something to?
I know in K-12 we often have a blanket statement where parents can sign off. So say Brisbane Catholic Ed, if you remember, in one of the prior podcasts, Lee had got consent from the parents to say, yes, we'll use AI. And that's a general blanket consideration. But my thing is, when it's at the vet area and I'm a student, say, then I'd like a little bit more information about when that would be used. It's different in K-12, I think.
Yeah, so I guess in vocational education, we have a lot of students that are under the age of 18, so you've still got the parent responsible. So I would guess it's a question about how much detail you want to give them. If you give them too much detail, you might be constantly asking them, like a cookie banner, oh, we've got a new tool that's going to use your data. If you don't give them enough, you're going to lead to that suspicion that you're doing something I don't agree with. But the basic situation in privacy law in Australia is if you've got somebody's agreement to use their data, you should use it in ways that they would find consistent with the way you've collected it. So, for example, if you're collecting student data, you should use it to support teaching and learning. You shouldn't use it to promote Bitcoin to them. And so that's probably where it comes in. Is the AI use that we're doing consistent with what people might expect?
Yeah, definitely. So there's another angle on this as well now. And it's taking us back into a different demographic again now is we mentioned this slightly in the last news episode, but the eSafety Commissioner released a report recently about AI assistants and companions and the usage for kind of children's experiences with these in Australia, which is great because obviously this is something that's at risk. We've seen things in the US with unregulated use of some technologies and people anthropomorphizing or kind of befriending AI and even adults in this area. So it was a study done by the Safety Commissioner in the Australian area.
Yeah.
Looking at these, do you ever look at the findings at all?
Yeah. So they surveyed 2,000 students. Sorry, they surveyed 2,000 children between the age of 10 and 17. So let's assume they're all children.
Yeah.
80% of them had used an AI assistant. So that's a good number to have. 80% of people, of kids between 10 and 17 have used an AI. And so it kind of leads to this thing about what are they using it for? And they're headed in two directions. Yes, they're using it for schoolwork, but then the second is this thing around relationships. They're using it as somebody that they can have conversations and an emotional connection with. And so that was the focus of the regulators' work, or the eSafety Commissioner's work, was to understand how that relationship developed and who has a duty of care to think about the child in that scenario. And
they said about a notable minority of children who use AI, I'm reading off the screen here, use AI companions, 8%. And many children who would use AI assistants or companions reported using them regularly, up to 20% daily or more. So the people who are using them quite a lot.
Yeah. And so if this is an area you're involved in a school, I think this is a great report to go and have a read of, to just get an idea of the scale of what is going on and to be better informed when that staff room conversation comes up. Tim Kitchen has written some good stuff about this. So Tim, ex-teacher, involved in education now, doing some great work with AI, comes at it from a teacher perspective. So in the show notes, we'll put a link to Tim's post around this, because I think that's the thing to read before you go and read the report. But good data points.
Tim's got a new podcast out as well, so definitely worth listening to Tim and listen to his views on creativity and AI in education.
Okay, Dan, that has been a journey, an emotional journey through some highs and lows in there. I can't get over the fact that we had to ask the question, are we the baddies? I'm confident that we've concluded we're not. We have to remember that the role that we're playing with this podcast is to take complex stuff and make it easier for other people to understand. And that's the role we're doing. We are optimistic about AI, but we recognize it's got upsides and downsides. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thanks, Ray. Thanks for bringing those things to life today for us as well. I'm going to now go and play some golf. And no, I'm not. I'm thinking about the data center water usage there. But yeah, it does give us perspective. So thank you for bringing some of those things to life. And we have said we're going to talk about sustainability again and bring people like Andy Massey on when we can. So that'll be good.
Yeah, but we've got to remember, it may not be a rational discussion we need to have. We need to address the big issue, not just it's water, it's power or whatever. Yeah, interesting discussion and a useful thing for people to know. See you soon, Dan.
Thanks, Ray.